Hi, I'm Brian Woodbury, and you're watching the podcast where nostalgia comes alive. It's Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. Roll it!
Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, the podcast where nostalgia comes alive. Since July of 2021, Jake and his friends have interviewed professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and many more. Who will they be chatting with in this week's interview? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode, Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. I'm your host, Jake Deffinbaugh. With me today is our co-hosts, Chris Bixby and Matt Bingel. How you guys doing?
Good.
We're good, Jake. How are you?
How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for asking. So, Chris, what do we have for today?
Our guest for today, he is a musician and composer whose work has been heard on the show Sesame Street, as well as channels like HBO, the movie channel. He leads the group, the Revolutionary Snake Ensemble. And we're here to talk about those and some of the other things he's done too. And here he is, Ken Field. Ken, happy to have you here.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
Doing great. Thank you.
Happy to have you here.
Yes.
Yeah, so to kick things off, in your own words, could you kind of introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. I write music and I play music, and that's what I do. I write music and I play music. I used to do computer work for many years. Did some very interesting work in real-time speech processing, and left that for doing music full-time about now quite a while ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I play saxophone and flute. I used to play very actively with a group called Birdsongs of the Mesozoic, which was a kind of post-punk, ensemble. It had two keyboards, guitar, and saxophone, and we played and traveled pretty widely. The Revolutionary Snake Ensemble is a six-piece group. Full group is six pieces, four horns, drums, and bass. We focus on some experimental music, some New Orleans second line music, and funk, and kind of taken a lot of different places. And I do a bunch of other things, but that kind of covers it.
Nice.
Nice. Awesome.
Very nice. So what was your background like and how did you grow up?
Well, you're making an assumption there, but we won't go there. That I grew up, to be explicit. I was raised in New Jersey, in Red Bank, New Jersey, in that area, which is the area that Count Basie was based in for a while, and that also was an area I grew up next to some early performances by a club, a teen club actually, where there's some early performances by Bruce Springsteen in one of his bands before he got famous. I played clarinet starting when I was about 10 and kept playing it all the way through, did pretty well, was pretty compulsive about practicing, but didn't really know anything about improvising or writing music, anything like that. And I got to college. I went to college in Providence, Rhode Island, and promptly ran into a door and broke my front tooth, which didn't really bode well for playing the clarinet. So I switched to the flute, started doing that, started working in a coffee house there on campus, sat behind the counter, kind of played flute. Nobody could hear me with some of the rock bands and blues bands and jazz bands that were playing at the coffee house. Learned a lot, eventually started working, doing computer work, and started playing with a band on the side that did really interesting music. Jazz and fusion, and back then there was a band called Weather Report that kind of jumped on that. They did some music that some very significant jazz artists had played. They introduced me to a lot of that, and eventually did the computer work for a while, and then a coworker suggested I go off to music school, study actually privately with a guy up in Boston, Joe Viola, a very famous saxophone teacher who's now passed. And I did that, and then I took off and studied full-time at Berkeley. It's kind of the story of my life.
Nice.
There's a very important missing part to that, that I should not have left out, and that's that I met a wonderful woman named Karen Aqua, and she made animated films. And met her. Met her in college. She was going to another school in Providence. I went to Brown. She went to RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. She was an animator, and we took a cross-country trip. We weren't a couple, but we both signed on for the same guy who was driving cross-country just after I graduated from college, and she still had another year. And so we met that way. And when we both got back to Providence, we started seeing each other. And she was making animated films, and I was doing music. So she asked me to do some for soundtracks, some of her earliest soundtracks. And she went on to do a lot of amazing work. She has a website, karenaqua.com, and she passed away in 2011, sadly, but her work lives on, and
Absolutely, yes.
I just heard from somebody just featured an article about her work out in New Mexico in a newspaper in New Mexico.
Wow.
So, people know about her work pretty widely, her work for Sesame Street, her own independent work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a real important relationship. Obviously, it was a really big deal for me to know and spend that much time. I'm really grateful I had that much time to spend with her. Sad that she's gone, but grateful to have been with her, obviously personally and also professionally.
Definitely. So now, growing up, did you have any favorite bands or musical acts?
Yeah, I did. One thing that happened when I was growing up is my parents. So I was born in 1953, a long time ago. And at some point there, probably when I was about, I don't know, maybe 10, our TV set broke, and my parents didn't fix it. So, they were onto something back then about TV, and maybe the benefit of not having one. And I went and listened to the radio instead. I went upstairs to my room and just would listen to the radio, listen to AM radio. Later, I listened to FM radio, some very influential stations in New York City, because we were, within broadcast distance of New York City. WNEW was a big FM station. So I listened to a lot of music on the radio, and I think that's why I became interested in doing music. One of the bands I loved back then was Procol Harum, which started out as a really cool band and ended up as not so cool a band, in my opinion. And I listened to early, just all the kind of slightly off groups back then that were doing interesting things. And then as time went on, they started doing less interesting things. But Procol Harum was a big influence on me.
Nice.
Awesome.
Very nice. So how did composing come into play?
Yeah, it's a good question. What happened is when Karen started asking me to do soundtracks, that's how composing came into play. She didn't have a big budget for soundtracks, so I did a lot of the soundtracks by layering my own saxophone. I play alto saxophone, so I would maybe do my own percussion or maybe hire some people, but and maybe have some other instrumentalists play. But in any case, I would write music for her short animated films. And I didn't really know much about composing, but I knew about playing a melody. And so I would play melodies and then maybe in some cases layer additional melodies on top of the initial melody, aka counterpoint. And that's how I got started. I did a bunch of that. I did some music for another filmmaker in Boston after a while. And at some point I decided, hey, I have some kind of interesting stuff. I should maybe try to find somebody to produce an album, of my work, of my compositions. And then what happened is Karen had a residency out in New Mexico, in Roswell, New Mexico, at an artist retreat out there, a very cool artist retreat. And I wanted to go out there. She was out there for 6 months. I had a job, full-time job. I couldn't go out for 6 months. I went out for a couple of weeks, and I wanted to find a place to practice. And the guy who funded it had a big estate, very down-to-earth guy. But on his property, he had this underground room that was called the Henge. There was a big sculpture that looked like Stonehenge, kind of. They called it the Henge. And it was these underground rooms that had really cool acoustics. And so he was going out of town. Him and his wife were going out of town to their home in England. And he said, here, just get the key from my groundskeeper, and you can just go in there and play. And so I was like, wow, that's awesome. And I went in there and I decided I'm just going to try to record some stuff. So I rented some equipment and I went in there for a couple of weeks and I just recorded layer after layer of saxophone and percussion. And that became my first album, Subterranea, which ended up being pretty cool and getting some attention because
Awesome.
it had a little story. So that's how I got into composition. I knew a little bit. I had, by then not sure if by then I had studied at Berkeley or not, but then I learned a lot about theory at Berkeley.
Nice.
Awesome. So, do you remember your first composing job?
I'm not sure I remember the very first one, but I remember one that was pretty influential, which was the Sesame Street piece called what was it called? Parade, no, not Parade of Numbers. Well, Parade of Numbers was kind of interesting. So Parade of Numbers for Sesame Street was an interesting challenge. I'll talk a little bit about that. Karen had these animated characters with these kind of 3D little miniature masks that were on the heads of the characters, and they were walking across the screen. And she wanted some music for that. The complications were that she animated it, so some of them walked across the screen. It took them longer to get across the screen than others. And I told her, well, a good tempo for them walking would be 120 beats per minute. That's kind of comfortable for a groove. But some of them took 6 beats. Some of them took 5 beats. Most of them took 4 beats to get across the screen. And I'm like, hey, what the hell? Couldn't you made them all make 4 beats across the screen? What was up with that? But anyway, that's what it was. So I had to write music that could have that variation. So sometimes it would take 6 beats or 5 beats, and you could do that. But the other part was that the piece was supposed to run based on the number of the day on Sesame Street. I know you're familiar with that. So sometimes it would run to 13, sometimes 14, all the way up to 20. So I had to write a piece of music that could stop at any point. That could stop after 13, stop after 14. It's like that's not a song. You can't write a song that can stop at any arbitrary measure.
Mhm.
So instead, what I did was write a groove, like a repeated groove, and I added and subtracted layers. So it was kind of a vamp, musically speaking. And there was a melody, there was a complex melody. There were 3 complex melodies that layered on top of each other. If you listen to the piece, you'll hear those. And some they come in, they go out, it adds some interest, but it's not a song per se, it's a vamp, and it can stop at any of those points. So that was an interesting one. And that's a piece that I still do with the Revolutionary Snake Ensemble.
Oh,
We
wow.
could talk a little more about that, about why that works. But
Yeah.
so the other piece that I was going to talk about, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. It's Pass Along Alphabet. The Pass Along Alphabet. I'm not sure if you've seen that one, but it was a piece that she did using. So she took photos of some kids in the neighborhood, some relatives of ours, some friends, some kids of friends, some of whom who have grown up to be prominent in various ways. So that's kind of cool. And she took these individual photos as they're like in one position and then another position, another position. She took all these photos. She manually cut out the photographs. She was like totally old school. She didn't do this in the computer. She would actually cut out the photographs around the character, and then she'd take successive photos of them so it looked like they were moving, right? Animation.
Okay, wow.
And then she had them passing numbers. So she animated like the letter A, letters, pass along the letter A from one of these characters to the next, and it would be pass along alphabet. So she asked me to write some music for it, and I came into the studio. I said, yeah, I got something. And I recorded some music, and she was like, no, that kind of, I don't know what words she used, but basically that sucked. She really didn't think it was, worthy. So I'm like, okay, we have the studio tomorrow. So I went home and stayed up till like, all hours of the night and wrote a totally new piece. And it was great. And she loved it. And it just got me to understand that writing music, especially when you're writing soundtrack music, you have to let go of your ego, and you have to be willing to have somebody say, that just doesn't work, and just start again, or because it's hard when you write some music, you have a little bit of ownership of it. You feel like it's your baby kind of, and somebody says, I don't like what your baby looks like, you're gonna kind of take offense, but you can't with this. You gotta just take it in stride and say, you're the boss. So
Definitely. So I'm kind of curious, how did you and Karen begin working on Sesame Street?
yeah, Karen was approached by I started working on it just because Karen did. I didn't have anything to do with it before that. She was approached by a producer there named Arlene Sherman, who was amazing. Yeah, you know her. Sadly passed away, but she was an incredible producer who had a vision at Sesame Street, and she hired a lot of animators, some of our friends, and a lot of other people. And one of the things that she said to both me and to Karen was, "I don't want you to talk down to the kids. I want you to make interesting work that adults would like to see or hear." And that was kind of, it's kind of nervy for a kids show, and a little different. So that's what we did. And I mentioned before, that I still play some of this music with my band. That's probably why, because I was writing music that I thought was cool and funky and worked, and it works for adults. And they don't have to know that it was written for a kids show, although I usually say something about it. But so that's how she contacted Karen, and I'm not sure how she knew about Karen, but she contacted her and said, I'm doing this. And every season they had a Sesame workshop, or Sesame Street back then had a curriculum guide where they would give the topics that they wanted to cover that season. And so Karen would go through that, and she would write proposals for a couple of things that responded to the items in the curriculum guide. So
Nice.
whether it was numbers or a particular number or friendship, she wrote a great thing about, different topics. So
Nice.
Awesome. So I'm kind of curious, do you have any favorite inserts you worked on with Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I love the one Imagination. It was a very early one. I just think it's just cool, and I like the music, but I really like the concept. Let's see. I like the pass along alphabet piece. I think that's pretty cool.
That's a good one.
They're all great. Move to the Beat was kind of nice, and then there's these two, I think, Dancing with an Elephant and Dancing with somebody else, I forget. They were all very creative and very cool. As far as my contributions, I mean, I can't judge that, but I like. It was great to have the opportunity to write music and have it be heard by so many people, even though
Yeah.
didn't know it was me, but
Exactly. That Parade of Numbers one's good. In fact, this is two of the DVDs I have in the background. 1, 2, 3, Count with Me and The Great Numbers Game.
Mhm.
Oh
I
yeah,
have
the great
that
videos.
piece. And then there's also the one I like,
Mhm.
Dancing with Elmo.
Oh yeah,
That's a good one.
Yes, that's a really good one too.
yeah. That was a cool one, and for that she went to New York. We lived in Boston and Cambridge. She went to New York and took still photos of Elmo that she then cut out in the same way that I mentioned before. She cut them out and made them into moving images.
Nice.
Oh, awesome.
That's really cool. So
Yeah.
overall, what was it like getting to work on projects with your wife, Karen?
Mhm. Yeah, that's also a good question. You guys ask good questions. So
Thank you.
it's interesting because we, for the most part, worked on projects where Karen was the boss. Where Karen was the director, and it was her work, and I was sort of a hired gun. And when you're in a relationship with someone, you presumably are not, you don't have that kind of hierarchy. You're equal partners.
Right.
So the transition from being equal partners in the relationship to being subservient, really, to what Karen wanted, that takes a little bit of mental, I don't know, manipulation, mental manipulation. I think we did okay. There were definitely arguments where I would, hold on to something and say, I think this really works. And she'd be like, no, it doesn't work. And that would be true not only for the Sesame Street work, but for her own work.
Mhm.
At one point, we made a film called Sensorium, where we purported to be equal partners on the film. So it was a equal collaboration, co-directed, co-produced. And it was an abstract film. I think it ended up being a really nice film. I'm very proud of it. Very proud of the music. But in the end, it really was her film, I have to say. So no matter how you slice it, the visuals take priority over the music. I mean, I have this thing I always say, which is that the traditional wisdom for soundtracks is they should be invisible. You shouldn't notice them when you're watching a movie or a film. I'd like to think that the music is more an equal partner, and the music maybe should be able to stand alone without watching the film, and the film should be able to stand alone without having the music, and then you put them together and it's more powerful than either of them individually, the same way a relationship would be. So, but that's just my opinion, and a lot of people don't share it.
Yeah, I understand.
So I'll tell you, I do a radio show myself, and
Nice.
I had the opportunity way back now, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that, to interview a very prominent Japanese composer who did a lot of film work called Ryuichi Sakamoto. He just passed away, and he worked with David Bowie. He did a lot of very important work. He was well loved.
Wow.
And I went back when he passed away, maybe a month ago now. I went back and listened to the interview I did with him then, and we talked about that issue. And I asked him how he feels about soundtrack work and about whether it should be invisible. He said, as a viewer, I think soundtrack should be invisible, but as a composer, I think it should be equal partner. So it was interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. So how do you feel that, Sesame Street's legacy, still lives on to this day?
Well, I think it deservedly so. It was a very innovative concept to utilize this thing called television that was, not that old at the time, and to make it an educational tool. As I mentioned, my parents didn't take it away. They just never replaced our TV because TV had a negative, impact on people, and I think still does, even as however you want to define TV at this point, but there's a lot of negative impact that the media has. But I think the idea of taking this tool and turning it into a positive educational tool was a great one. And I think it was really well done. There was a lot of research that went into it. You know all that, so I'm not telling you anything new.
Mhm.
And so I think the fact that the legacy lives on is a great thing. I
Yeah.
think it would be greater if it still had if it was still, as active a player as it used to be. I mean, it was the only thing for a while. Then there were some others,
Yeah.
the company and some others, but now it's a pretty minor player, and I think that's unfortunate in a way because so much went into it. But
Definitely.
that's the way the world works. I mean, things come in and out. So
Yeah.
Also, I
Definitely.
get royalties every time they play my stuff. So I wish they played it. I wish it was on more, so I get more money.
That's for sure. So your work has also been broadcast on HBO, the movie channel, and the Sundance channel. Can you talk about your projects for those?
Well, those were all Karen's films. So, so her independent films, her work for Sesame Street was one aspect of her creative work, but she did about a dozen short independent animations, and those did get played on a number of different outlets, including those and quite a number of international animation festivals, etc., and film festivals.
Nice.
So, that was still riding Karen's coattails.
Definitely. So you kind of touched up on this a bit earlier, but you also lead the group, the Revolutionary Snake Ensemble, which you mentioned you also performed some of your Sesame Street tracks with. How did that kind of come about?
It was an invitation by some friends. It was a women's group actually in Cambridge who wanted a band to play for a party, I think a birthday party in a loft in Cambridge. And me and some friends got together and we just kind of jammed, and it was fun. And we marched around the room and we were playing horns and percussion, and people dug it. We dug it. It was fun. And they asked us to play at some clubs, and we did. And eventually it kind of morphed from what it started out as, which was, I don't know, kind of tribal rhythms. And then it morphed a little bit into New Orleans style rhythms and funk. And I kind of took it over after a little while and really, I guess, transformed it a little bit. So it's been around for many, many years. The personnel has changed a lot over the years, but for the past 7, 8 years, I've had the same people, awesome musicians, some of the best musicians in the Boston area. I'm, really grateful to have the opportunity to play regularly with these people. And we've recorded a bunch of albums. Stuff gets played pretty, we're not household names by any means, but people know about us. Small groups of people know about us. There's probably one person that knows about us in some places. The album does well, and the albums do well. And one of the nice things is we are influenced by New Orleans second line Mardi Gras music, along with other things. And we had, for about 6 years, we were invited to travel on the train, on the Amtrak Crescent train down to New Orleans and play on the train. They gave us free passes, and we'd play in Mardi Gras parades for about 6 years, and play at clubs down there. And people thought we were from there. So that was a nice little bit of credibility that we got.
Nice.
Got nice reviews in the New Orleans media and stuff. So we're still active. I still have the band, and we play a lot. So it's a fun band.
Awesome.
That's cool. So you can kind of say that New Orleans was kind of like a second home, I guess. So
in a
so to
way,
speak.
yeah, in a way, musically, definitely. I mean, one of the things about New Orleans, it's a very unique culture, and if you have the opportunity, if you haven't been there, if you have the opportunity to go, it's still a unique culture. It changed a little after Katrina, but it's got this culture of celebration of life, which is pretty powerful and pretty impactful. And to this day, people, well, people want to access that culture through, for example, second line memorial parades. So the second line came out of the New Orleans funeral approach to funerals, where there'd be acknowledgement of the grief and sadness of somebody's passing, and then there'd be an opportunity to celebrate life and celebrate that person in a very up-tempo way. We did one of those when Karen died, and it was amazing. We had about 400 people and
Wow.
did a procession in addition to other things. But so New Orleans has a really special place in my heart, and it did for Karen. She really wanted a second line parade when she passed away. So yeah, I would say it's a place that I really feel very fond of.
It's wonderful. One of the places I definitely like to go for sure. I know a family that have gone, but I personally haven't yet. I'd like to.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. I mean, there's a little bit of a rap about Mardi Gras, and that it's not family friendly. That's one way to say it. But it really depends. There are lots of family. It depends on where you go, and if you're hanging out with a bunch of knuckleheads, then it's going to be a knucklehead kind of. But if you're hanging out with families in the neighborhoods, it's a really welcoming and beautiful event. And there are lots of other events in New Orleans too.
Yeah, in New Orleans, yeah, it's great.
Oh,
It'd be very, very awesome to go there one day. And I know, I know you probably don't know the group, but I know we previously interviewed Scott Durbin, who's one of the members of the Imagination Movers, which I'm thinking the Movers originally
from New Orleans. Yeah.
From New Orleans.
They're the Imagination Movers.
Okay, I don't know that band. Yeah, but I would like to check it out. So
yeah, they're a very well-known children's group, and they were based in New Orleans. So yeah,
yep, been around quite a while as well. They're wonderful.
Yes.
Cool.
So you were also a longtime member of the modern music ensemble Birdsongs of the Mesozoic.
That's right.
What was that like?
Well, we're actually doing a reunion gig sometime this summer, believe it or not.
Nice.
Yeah. That was a very influential group for me. I joined that group because I had a friend who played with them, sort of a friend of a friend, and I was playing with a funk group in Boston called Skin. It's kind of psychedelic funk. It was an interesting band, actually doing some very interesting things. And that band broke up. We put out a record and then broke up. That's how things worked. Put out a record, break up. So I was having dinner with some people, and somebody said, "Well, Ken, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, my band just broke up." And they said, "Oh, Birdsongs, one of the guys left, and they needed somebody. Maybe you should check it out." So I auditioned for them, and it went really well. And I played with them for quite a number of years. We're not active right now particularly, but still close friends with the guys in the band. We get together on a regular basis. It's very cool. That band was mostly oriented towards composed music, very interestingly composed music. What I do with the Snake Ensemble is mostly improvised music. So there's composition involved, but there's a lot of improvisation as well. Birdsongs, not much improvisation, all composed. And I just learned a lot from playing in that band about composition, about how to write music and how to write interesting music and write music that is complicated, but maybe doesn't sound complicated, that is accessible. And we toured up and down the East Coast every year in the spring. It was just a beautiful thing. Get in a van, drive down from Boston down through, Carolinas and Georgia, and at the amazing time of year, and just stay with friends along the way. It was a really treasured part of my musical life.
Oh,
nice.
Awesome. So you also worked with Bridgman Packer dance. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I did. That was an interesting thing. So that's a dance company. They are comprised of two individuals who happen to be married, and they started. They're based in New York area. They started working with a lot of dance companies. They have lots of people dancing. They just dance with the two of them, and they started working with things like shadows and to sort of enhance, to make it seem like there are more people or there was more things going on. And they used very creative use of lighting to do that. And then they started working with video and video projection. And they would pre-record images of themselves dancing, and then they would project that at life size and dance with those images. So they'd have multiple iterations of themselves dancing. Well, it turns out that I did that with my saxophone on some of my early recordings, like Subterranea that I mentioned, and a second CD I put out called Pictures of Motion, where I'd have layered saxophones. And I was at a conference. I was invited by actually a New Orleans guy to do some music for theater down in New Orleans. And as a result of that, I got invited to this conference of National Performance Network, and I met Myrna Packer. And somebody said, you should give her one of your CDs. So I gave her a CD. And I don't know, 9 months later, they called me and they said, we're just about to head off to Central America for some performances, but we're writing a proposal, grant proposal, and we'd like to include you in on it because we like your music. So that started me going.
Nice.
And it took me a while to realize the parallel between what I was doing musically and what they were doing visually. But I wrote some music and went and did performances with them all over the world. We went to Mexico, had a couple, I think 2 tours in Mexico, went to Europe and performed with them. And when I performed with them, it would generally be with backing tracks. So it'd be several layers of me playing, and then I'd play the missing layer live along with them. That was a lot of fun. And they're great people, and they're still at it. They're doing really great work.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So now, since 2015, you've led a band of musicians at the Honk Oz Festival in Australia. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah. So there's this thing called the Honk Festival. The Honk Festival started in Somerville, Massachusetts, when in 2000, I don't know, 6 maybe. And it was designed to be a festival of what we call activist street bands. Activist street bands are bands that are kind of in it to improve their community. They're not in it to make money. They're not in it to get famous. They're in it to sort of help various organizations at rallies or at outdoor events. A lot of it's political kind of stuff. And it helps to have music. So way back in the day, there were like folk musicians who did protest songs. So this is kind of the current version of that. And so there's a band in Boston called the Second Line Social Aid and Pleasure Society Brass Band that was doing that kind of work. And they decided, I wasn't in the band at the time, they decided to put together a festival to see if there were other bands like that that would come to Somerville and play. And they found that there were. So the first festival, they had 12 bands. They actually invited the Snake Ensemble, even though we are not that kind of a band. We're a more commercial band. But, and that started a little bit of a movement. And the festival in Somerville, I joined the organizing committee. I joined the Second Line Band. And the festival grew. It's now 600 musicians every year, about 25 bands. It's kind of like a major thing. And a lot of those bands then decided to put on their own similar festival, their own Honk festival in their communities. So there are now about 22 Honk festivals all over the world, including one in Australia.
Whoa.
And they're all independent. They do what they want, but they're all kind of along that same concept. And so the festival in Australia decided to put together this Honk Oz festival, and they I think it was really weird because I saw something on Facebook or somewhere on social media about them doing this, and I just put a comment in. I said, that's great, good luck. I don't know, something. And they saw me and they looked me up and they checked me out and they said, oh, we'd like to invite you with your band, the Snake Ensemble, to come and play at our festival. I'm like, whoa, that would be cool. But we don't have a lot of money. And it turned out it costs a lot of money to bring a band. So they couldn't afford to bring the band, but they just brought me. And then then we were like, what are you going to do what am I going to do once I get there? And so what we decided together is I would put together what we called a pickup band there at their festival, and bring some of my own material. I did some arrangements of some material, I brought some original pieces, and we played them together with people from that community in Australia. And it turned out it was very popular. People loved it, and they kept bringing me back year after year. And we've had as many as 75 to 100 people playing with me. Last year we had about 75 people, or last year, I mean in January, about 75 people playing in this band, which is a little intimidating, for one guy to be trying to lead all these people. But it worked out well, and people love it. People, and who knew, but I'm actually pretty good at doing that. So it's fun. So I've been going back every year. We took a time off for COVID, but and there's, you talked about New Orleans being a second home. At this point, Wollongong, New South Wales is a little bit of a second home, because my partner now, Cecily, and I have been there 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
So we know a lot of people. We stay with the same person in her home, and we've become very close friends to a lot of people there.
Nice.
Awesome.
It's a very cool thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So aside from performing and composing with groups, you also done a lot of solo work. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I do. I've released these albums of layered saxophone mostly. And nowadays, I'm doing work with a looping pedal board. I'm doing a performance later this month, actually, in Boston with the looping pedal board. And it allows me to create all by myself. It's fun. It's just one aspect of what I do. Some of my solo work has been with other musicians, where we're playing my compositions. It's just another outlet for me to play music and write music.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice. So now, over the years, you've performed in many countries, like Canada, Mexico, France. Can you share any stories from performing overseas?
Well, let's see. I had the opportunity to put together a group in Sweden to play for an animation festival, actually. And they supplied me with musicians, and we did some of my material, and a story. They were great. It was great. Another really nice opportunity was to perform in. Now I'm trying to remember where this was. In Hungary. No, I can't remember where, but in Poland. It was in Poland at an animation festival in Poland called Animator. And this was after Karen had passed away. And what they asked me to do was put together to play live soundtracks for Karen's films and a program of Karen's films. And we did it in a big outdoor venue, and they connected me with 3 other saxophone players and a drummer. And I transcribed some of the music that I had written, and sort of made it playable by that kind of an ensemble of multiple saxophones, multiple alto saxophones, and a drummer. And it was transformative. It was amazing for people who were not familiar with Karen's work to see it, and to have this live ensemble playing it, and these great musicians from Poland play it. That concept, we then did performances at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston of that same concept with different musicians that were based in Boston area. the opportunities I've had to play in Mexico were kind of interesting because this was mostly with Bridgman Packer Dance, and we played a lot of the areas we played were northern Mexico near the border with the US. Those towns are well known for being quite dangerous. There's a lot of issues with drug cartels. And so it was a little nerve-wracking to go on that tour. They supplied us with a driver and a security person who had a little badge. And I don't know if he had a weapon, but the badge looked like he bought it at 7-Eleven. I'm not sure if he was actually a legitimate security person or just because the contract said they needed a security person, they just got this guy and he bought a badge. I remember staying in one of the hotels, and the state militia was also staying at the same hotel. So you'd get in the elevator to go up to your room, and you're surrounded by like 12 guys with submachine guns in the elevator. It was pretty interesting. You drive down the street, and there's militias, the state militia standing on the corners just with their weapons and watching, and they go by in in pickup trucks, and on the back there'd be a couple of guys with guns. So it was pretty interesting, to say the least.
Sounds it, yeah.
A little unnerving.
Yeah.
But they loved it. They loved the dance thing. You could tell one of the places we played was like in the middle of nowhere. You drive through, and there's like no trees, just desert, and all of a sudden there's this really fancy big art center, like performing arts center.
Huh.
And you just are like, I wonder where the money came to build this. I wonder if there's one of those guys, who makes their money from drug running, whatever, who funded this. Maybe not, but it definitely occurred to me.
Nice.
So overall, what do you enjoy most about working in the music business?
The funnest part is playing with a bunch of people that I know well and that are good players, like playing with my band. It's just a gas. We have a great time. We know each other. As I said, a lot of the Snake Ensemble material is improvisational. That includes the arrangements. So they know when I look at them a certain way, that means that something's supposed to happen, and they just do it. Or they just come up with their own things to do. So it's just a blast. It's a lot of fun. It's also incredibly gratifying to write music and have it, be performed for dance performance. Right now I'm working on a commission for a dance performance that'll happen in 2024, and it's really fun to work on composing music, to work it till it's right, until it's like, yeah, this is really good. I like this. Doesn't usually happen right away, but after a while you kind of work on it, and then it's like, yeah, that's great. I like that. Somebody else might not like it, but if I like it, that's very gratifying, and I like it.
Yeah, that's what matters,
Yeah, it makes me happy.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So, is there anything you're working on currently that you can share?
Yeah, well, I am working on this. A couple of things. I'm working on this commission for this dancer. Her name is Joni Block, and this will be a performance in 2024 in the Boston area. It's going to be mostly layered saxophones, but not entirely. And that will eventually come out as an album, I'm sure, the work that I'm doing. I'm involved in a new group that's called Sugarcane Duquesne Redo, which is a recreation of a bigger band. There's a smaller version of a bigger band that's kind of 1940s and 50s and 60s jump swing material. Really fun material. Me, a trombonist, a drummer, guitarist, and singer, and a bass player. We're going to be playing a bunch out on the Cape this summer.
Oh, nice.
I have some regular gigs this summer, Wednesday nights and Saturday nights in Provincetown. Wednesday nights with a vocalist. A lot of them are a vocalist named Nadia Washington from Boston who's going to come in. The drummer for a lot of those, there are two drummers. One is an incredible drummer named Savannah Marshall. The other is a drummer named James Kamal Jones, who used to play with Yusef Lateef and with Ornette Coleman. So he's kind of a major figure in the jazz world. And Saturday nights playing with a vocalist at this venue in Provincetown. So I have a lot of, and then another thing I'm working on these days that takes up a lot of my time is I'm leading an organization called Jazz Boston. Jazz Boston is a nonprofit that advocates for the Boston area jazz community, for the musicians, the audiences, the venues, the media. And I do a weekly radio show. So it airs in Boston and out on the Cape.
Nice.
So I'm busy.
So now, working in the music field, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Well, I think it's really hard. It's really hard to make a living. That's really the bottom line. I think I've been very fortunate. I had this computer job for many years and was able to save up some money, live very cheaply, save up some money. And I was able to play creative music without worrying quite so much about how much money I was making from it because of that. At this point, I do fine, but getting started is challenging. There's a lot of musicians. There's a lot of great musicians, and you have to have a lot of different talents beyond musicianship to be able to sustain your musical career. You have to be organized. You have to, be able to work with people. It's a really important part. You have to, read your email on a regular basis. You have to do a lot of things that, and not everybody has. They could be great musicians, but they don't necessarily have all those characteristics. I don't know if I do, but I got lucky and am able to do what I do, and I'm just always be thankful that I can do that.
Exactly. That's great.
I think there's another aspect to being a musician that's challenging, and that's keeping it interesting for yourself and for others. I mean, there's avoiding what's called imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, where you do something and it's like, that sucks. I suck. I'm no good. Why am I even doing this? That's something that every creative person goes through at times, and every creative person feels like they're not worthy. They're just they look at other people doing maybe what they consider to be better things, being more successful, and it can be challenging to maintain your sense of ability to say, I might not be the best sax player in the world, but what I do is interesting to me and maybe to some others, and it's worth doing.
Definitely.
I played with the Snake Ensemble for about 10 years before I thought it was worth recording an album, because there's so many New Orleans bands doing, the real deal. And I thought, why should I be wasting, time and energy and money? And then at some point I realized, we are doing something interesting and something different and something that's credible. So that's a challenge as any kind of creative person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what piece of advice would you give to anyone who wants to get into these fields?
I think, it's all cliches, because it's all been said before, but you got to believe in yourself. You gotta think, you got to be realistic about your abilities. You can't believe that you're great if you're not. There are musicians out there who feel like they're great musicians, and you hear them play and they're not. So you got to have a realistic understanding of your own abilities and realize that that there's a niche for what you do, as long as you know what you can do and what maybe you need more work on. I don't know. Try not to get caught up with commercialism. Try not to get caught up with making money. If you can somehow figure out a way to avoid that. Of course, you need money to live on, right? So you can't ignore that. But
Right.
it's easy to get caught up with playing, for example, high-paying gigs
Hmm.
that are mind-numbing. Like playing for weddings or that are not particularly creative. And once you start doing that and you're making a lot of money doing it, it's hard to break yourself away from that. I feel like I've had the ability to play creative music that, I won't take a gig that's not interesting to me, that's not fun and interesting. And so that's a fortunate position to be in. But I think if you can do that, you're going to end up doing something new and different and interesting every time you do whatever you do, whatever form of creativity it is, to really challenge yourself and do something interesting.
Definitely.
It's all cliches, but that's what I got.
Yep. No worries. So turn the tables. What's the best piece of advice that you've received for working in those fields?
Well, it's kind of a technical thing, but I don't know. I'd have to think hard about what the best piece of advice is. But early on, my saxophone teacher, Joe Viola, told me to learn to read concert pitch music and sight transpose. Now, that may not mean anything to people who don't play an instrument, but different instruments are pitched to different keys. So trumpet is in B flat and clarinet's in B flat and alto saxophone's in E flat. And typically the music is transposed for you, so you just read the notes. But Joe Viola told me I should learn to read concert pitch music, and that has served me very well.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's pretty specialized advice, but that's what comes to mind,
Yeah, of course.
No worries.
Yeah. So what would you like to say to those who have supported your work over the years?
I hope I've done your support justice, and of course, thank you. But I think people support each other. I do a radio show.
Yeah.
People send me music all the time to play on my radio show, so I have the opportunity to support other people. It's an example of what goes around comes around, I guess, in a way. So I understand both sides of it. I understand how many things I get by email every week, and I try to listen to everything, because I know that if I send something out, I'd want somebody to listen to it and make a judgment. So, yeah, did that answer the question? I don't actually remember
Yeah.
what the question
Yeah, it
was.
did.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if people would like to connect with you, where can people find you?
Kenfield.org, KENFIELD.org. Is the best place. There's also a website for the band and for their other websites, but you can get to all of them from that website. For me, Kenfield.com was taken. It's a door store in England, so I couldn't use Kenfield.com. People ask me why I'm .org. Am I an organization? And it turns out anybody can be .org. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And I also tell them, well, Kenfield.disorg was not available.
Yeah, the websites will be in the description down below, so people can check it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to end this
And
off,
I have, by the way, there is an email list, and you can get to that from my website. And I'm not too active on Instagram. I have an Instagram account. It's RevSnakeOns, RevSnakeENS. And I have, I'm more active on Facebook because I'm older. And so they can find me on Facebook and connect with me there as well.
nice.
Nice.
Nice. So to end this off, the last question that Matt's about to ask is the question that we ask all of our guests at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, of course, this podcast is called Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. When you think of nostalgia, what do you think of? Or how would you define the word nostalgia?
An appreciation for things that are no longer actively part of our daily life. That's what I think of when I think of nostalgia. But, I will say that so many things that maybe are not, you wouldn't think are part of our daily life, are part of our brains. Those of us who either were there at the time, were around and absorbing those things,
Mm-hmm.
or those of us who go back and see things that were around before they were alive or were experiencing culture or whatever. And so in that sense, things don't go away. Things are still present. Things from the past are present in the present.
Definitely.
And so I think as long as you think about them and remember them, and sometimes they do become part of the current culture, then that's not the past. It's the present.
Right. Great
How's
way to
that?
end on.
Mhm.
Yes.
Definitely. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was
Yes,
fun.
thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And thank you for what you've done and be a part of our lives, and keep up your great work and see what's next for you.
Thank you very
Sorry for
much. I
that.
appreciate it. It's great to have an opportunity to meet you all and talk
Yeah,
to
of
you.
course. Yes,
Likewise.
you too. You too.
Likewise.
Okay.
Yes,
You take care.
Yes, keep in
Thank
touch,
you.
Ken. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
enjoy what Harwich has to offer.
Yes.
I take care. Have a great rest of your day, Ken.
Absolutely.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye,
See
Ken.
ya.
Bye. Yeah, that was a fun chat, but it's goodbye from us as well, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. And
Yes,
see you
we
next
got-
time for another great episode to come.
Yes,
So-
we've absolutely enjoyed our time with Ken Field, but of
Yes.
course brings another episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show to a close. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye, everyone.
Yes, take care, everyone. See you next
Bye-bye.
time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show interview. Be sure to follow Jake and the crew on social media and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.